Welcome back, everybody, to our ongoing series on the Ten Commandments. This is episode 10. We'll be looking at commandment number 8, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And as we've learned with all of the commandments, you've got the main commandment, and then underneath that and beyond that, you've got various components and aspects and degrees, distinctions that we need to make in terms of what actions violate a given commandment and what actions don't. So that's going to be the same kind of theme in this commandment. It forbids bearing false witness. And it's interesting because when most people look at this commandment, they translate false witness as lying. And they kind of, in their minds, think of this commandment as thou shalt not lie. And of course, lying is a component of this commandment. It's a major component of this commandment. But as we've seen with the other commandments, it doesn't just stop there. There are other things we can do short of outright lying that we'll learn in this episode actually do violate this commandment. Because the commandment forbids false witness. And false witness, first and foremost, obviously encompasses lying, but it encompasses things beyond lying. So our job this episode with this commandment is to talk about the lying aspect of it, but also to talk about all the other ways, short of lying, that we can still bear false witness and therefore violate this commandment. So, with that kind of teaser at the beginning of this episode, let's dig in and let's see what those components and aspects are. We'll start again with the Catechism of the Catholic Church. How does it introduce us to this commandment? Catechism says, the 8th commandment forbids, and again, words have meaning, bearing false witness, not just lying, but other ways. Listen to how the Catechism, the 8th commandment forbids misrepresenting the truth. Now again, we can misrepresent the truth first and foremost by lying, but there's all kinds of things short of lying that we can do that will misrepresent the truth. So this commandment, the first thing we can say about this commandment is it's maybe more expansive than we thought. We shouldn't just translate it, thou shalt not lie, because this commandment is forbidding bearing false witness, and it's forbidding misrepresenting the truth. That's what this commandment actually speaks to, lying being the first and foremost way to do those things, but then there are other ways as well, okay? Now, this moral prescription to not bear false witness, to not misrepresent the truth, it finds its basis in, God himself, who can neither deceive nor be deceived, who is truth, okay? Jesus himself said, when he was talking with Pilate, I came into this world to bear witness to the truth. So if we are going to be Christians, if we are going to be little Christs, and if we're going to imitate Christ, since Christ is truth itself, we have to be truthful. Truthful, yes, in our words, but also truthful, yes, in our actions. Because another thing we need to talk about when we unpack this commandment is the necessity of our words and our actions aligning with each other, okay? Because if they don't, if we say one thing and we do another, then we're engaging in hypocrisy, and we know that Jesus multiple times in very forceful and direct and definitive language denounced the scribes and the Pharisees for just that. For their hypocrisy. He even called them hypocrites in a number of ways. So part and parcel of this commandment is not only not bearing false witness and not only not misrepresenting the truth in our words, but making sure we don't bear false witness and we don't misrepresent the truth in that our actions don't align with our words. Maybe something we never considered before as kind of part and parcel of this commandment. But if we are being hypocrites, if we are being hypocritical, if we're saying one thing and doing another, that's not going to align with this commandment either. So a lot going on here, so let's dig in, okay? More than just lying, bearing false witness, misrepresenting the truth. Now again, lying obviously is the first and foremost way to do that, as we've mentioned. But then within that, we've got to kind of do a little unpacking, because, you know, I can lie. I can give you a full lie where everything I say is false. Everything I say is a lie. Or I can lie by telling you kind of a half-truth. Some of what I say is truthful, some of what I say is false. All right, so I can lie full on by a full lie, or I can lie by telling you a half-truth or a half-lie. So if lying is the first and foremost way to violate this commandment, which it is, we've got to even make a distinction within that between a full-on lie and kind of a half-truth, half-lie. Because I can lie both of those ways. And we should also talk about, in terms of lying, that if I do it under oath in a court of law, then that lie takes on a special gravity and it's given a special name, perjury, which is actionable legally against me. Not only would it violate this commandment, but legally I would be violating the law. I would be guilty of perjury, right? Why is my lie raised to such a degree in a court of law? Number one, I've taken an oath to tell the truth, and we've already talked about the nature of oaths and their significance and their importance and what happens if we break them in a previous commandment. So number one, I'm taking an oath, and number two, if it's a criminal case, a person's life may be at stake. So in that special circumstance, because of the gravity of the situation and because of the gravity I'm taking an oath, if I lie in a court of law, that's especially grave, so much so it's given a specific name, perjury. So lying, a full-on lie, a half lie, whether I do it in the state of normal talking, normal circumstances, or whether I do it in that special state of a court of law, some distinctions and some nuances we've got to talk about in just unpacking lies. But we've also indicated that I can misrepresent the truth and bear false witness beyond lies. And the Catechism gives us kind of a listing of what those situations, short of lying, would be that would violate this commandment. Let's go through them really briefly here, because I've jotted them down now. Well, first of all, okay, rash judgment. If I commit rash judgment, okay, that is an offense against the truth, which therefore is a violation of this commandment, because again, in a negative aspect, it forbids bearing false witness and misrepresenting the truth. But if we looked at the positive aspect of it, it's calling us not to offend the truth in any way, shape, or form. And one offense I could give against truth is rash judgment, where based on something somebody else has told me, or based on an observation I make a judgment about that person without sufficient knowledge to form that judgment. So if I am judging another person based on insufficient evidence, something somebody's told me about that person or something I might have observed about that person, and my judgment of that person is negative, I'm coming up with a rash judgment. And because the judgment is rash, because it's not based on sufficient knowledge and information, that judgment could very well be the wrong judgment. It might not be a truthful judgment. And if it's not a truthful judgment, then it's an offense against truth, which is a violation of this commandment. Another thing I can do that would offend truth and therefore violate this commandment is if I engaged in what's called detraction. Now, in detraction, what I'm doing without a valid reason, I'm disclosing the faults of a person to somebody else. So, if there's somebody else, if there's a person, and I disclose their faults to somebody else without a validly objective reason to do so, that's called detraction. And that's an offense against truth, and therefore that's a violation of this commandment. A third way, short of outright lying, I can violate this commandment is what's called calumny. And in calumny, what I'm doing is I'm speaking in a manner that might cause other people to form a rash judgment. So now I'm not making the rash judgment myself. I'm speaking in a manner that could lead others to make a rash judgment against that person. And because their rash judgment, based on what I've said, is not based on sufficient information and sufficient knowledge, that's an offense against truth. So I could be offending against truth myself, by myself making a rash judgment, by myself engaging in detraction, or I can cause other people to offend against truth. And just because I said, well, I didn't offend against truth directly. Yeah, okay, maybe I caused another person to offend against truth. Just because I didn't do it directly doesn't exonerate me, okay? I'm involved in that process. I'm involved in the process of leading another person to offend against truth, and I'm going to have to be responsible for my part in that process. So lying, whether it's a full lie or a half-truth, half-lie, lying, whether it's my words and actions not coinciding, that's the first and foremost way I can violate this commandment. But we've also learned the first three of the things I can do short of that. Engaging in rash judgment, or causing another person to do so. Engaging in detraction, or causing another person to do so. Or engaging in calumny. Now, you might say, well, boy, okay, that's interesting. That should just about cover it. I didn't even know about those three. Thanks for bringing them to light, which is one of the purposes of doing this episode, of course. But that should just about cover it, right? Well, not so fast, because the Catechism does call out a couple of other things we can engage in, short of lying, and even short of rash judgment, detraction, and calumny, that would still come up against this commandment of bearing false witness and misrepresenting the truth. And that is irony. And because a lot of things say, oh boy, isn't that ironic? We use that term, in everyday parlance and everyday usage. So what aspect of irony is this commandment calling out for us to avoid? Well, irony, as the Catechism defines it, the type of irony we're talking about here, is irony, yes. But here's the key part. Irony aimed at disparaging someone else maliciously, okay, by characterizing some aspect of their behavior. So what kind of irony can I engage in that would violate this commandment? What the Catechism is telling us is the kind of irony I can engage in that violates this commandment is an irony that I deliberately aim at someone else for the purpose of disparaging them and caricaturing some aspect of their behavior. So it's a deliberate, malicious engaging in irony, okay? And again, you might say, well, okay, how does that offend against truth? Well, if I'm caricaturing some aspect of their behavior, I'm not really being truthful about it. I'm enlarging some aspect of it for, in this case, a malicious reason. So since I'm not representing that person's behavior in a full, truthful fashion, since I'm enlarging one aspect of it in order to maliciously disparage them, that's an offense against truth, and by virtue of that, it's a violation of this commandment. Okay? It's also a violation of the virtue of charity as well, because again, I'm seeking to disparage someone else's reputation, and I'm doing it maliciously. All right, and I'm doing it by engaging in this kind of irony. Now, wrapping up this episode, we should mention two other situations which the Catechism does bring out under its treatment of this commandment. And we bring them out in this episode because the Catechism of the Catholic Church brings them out. Because it's two things that we do, I would submit often enough, if not quite often. And we do it really kind of sometimes without really thinking about it, and certainly without thinking there could be anything wrong or harmful with it. And that is boasting or bragging. And you might say, well, okay, so I'm bragging about myself, or I'm boasting about myself, or I'm bragging or boasting about another person. Really? Really? Well, if we take a look at what the Catechism has to say, specifically paragraph 2481, this is what we read. Boasting or bragging is an offense against the truth. And you might be saying, well, wait a second. Especially, if I'm boasting or bragging about myself, I might be engaging in self-adulation, self-aggrandizement, self-pride, which we don't want to do because we want to practice humility. We don't want to be prideful. But if I'm boasting and bragging about somebody else, isn't that a good thing? I'm kind of calling attention to something good they did. And the Catechism suggests to us that, even though the intent may be good, just the very act of boasting or bragging is, again, a certain type of an enlargement that, we want to just be aware of, if nothing else. Also, it calls out flattery and adulation. And again, we say, oh boy, I'm flattered that you would think of me that day. Or you flatter me when you say that. And we say, well, isn't that a good thing? And interestingly, the Catechism has a few words about that as well that we should at least be aware of. And it's paragraph 2480. And this is what the Catechism has to say under the heading of flattery and adulation that it wants us to at least be aware of. It says, every word or attitude is forbidden which by flattery, adulation, encourages and confirms another, and here's the key, in malicious acts and perverse conduct. So when we're talking flattery and adulation, the Catechism is saying, well, at what point in time does that offend against truth and therefore violate this commandment? The Catechism makes it specific. When we're engaging in flattery and adulation for the express purpose of encouraging someone to commit a malicious act or engage in perverse conduct, when we're encouraging them to do those things, or after they've already done those things, if we're confirming those actions by flattering them and by heaping adulation on them for doing those malicious acts or engaging in that perverse conduct. So flattery and adulation, if it's with a good intent to bring out good acts, good things, that's one thing. But if it's done to encourage or confirm somebody else in an evil act, a malicious act, or perverse conduct, and we give them flattery and adulation for doing that, and that then spurs them on to continue to do it, or it causes somebody else to do it to get the same type of flattery and adulation, then that's an offense against truth, and that violates this commandment. So under flattery and adulation, boasting and bragging, the Catechism puts those types of conduct underneath the 8th commandment because, again, if we do them with the intent and purpose to encourage or confirm evil acts, malicious acts, perverse conduct, that's not a good thing. And the Catechism wants us to be aware of that. So, thou shalt not be false witness, as we've seen with the other commandments, and as we'll continue to see with our last two, commandments 9 and 10, you've got the main commandment, and then underneath and beyond that, you've got all these different aspects and components and all these different distinctions that sometimes fall under this commandment and sometimes don't. So, our takeaway from this commandment is don't necessarily just think false witness equals lying. So if I don't lie, I'm okay with this commandment. Certainly, the first and foremost way to violate it is by lying. So if you haven't lied, either fully or partially, or words not meeting up with actions, if you haven't lied, yes, you're okay with this commandment. But we've also learned in this episode, haven't we, that there are other ways we can violate this commandment by offending against truth. Rash judgment, detraction, calumny, irony, if it's for a specific purpose and reason, boasting and bragging if it's a specific purpose and reason, and also flattery and adulation if it's for a specific purpose and reason. And while I still have your attention, a couple of other things we should make mention because they kind of touch upon this commandment and people have questions about them and they come up, and that is, number one, what about what are called professional secrets in the world of business and industry? And what about what we tell a priest in the confessional? Does the Catechism have anything to say about those two situations? And it does. Let's take professional secrets first. Now, in terms of professional secrets, we're talking the world of business and industry primarily. And this is what the Catechism has to say about that. It says professional secrets, and it gives us a couple of examples. It says, for example, those of political office holders, soldiers, physicians, lawyers, or any type of confidential information given under the seal of secrecy must be kept, okay? Save for exceptional cases where keeping the secret is bound to cause very grave harm to the one who confided it, to the one who received it, or to a third party. And where the very grave harm can be avoided only by divulging the truth. It goes on to say, even if not confided under the seal of secrecy, private information prejudicial to another is not to be divulged without a grave and proportionate reason. It's a lot, so what the Catechism is saying basically are two things. Number one, any confidential information that I might have that's given to me under the seal of secrecy, like if I'm in political office or if I'm a soldier or a physician or a lawyer, okay? I'm bound not to reveal that information because I was given it under the seal of secrecy. That's the first half of what the Catechism says. Then the Catechism goes on to say, however, okay, there are situations, and these situations, again, the window is very small. It has to be a very grave situation, okay, where very grave harm can be done, okay, if I keep it, all right? Then it can be divulged, all right? But only for a very, very grave reason, and the divulging of it is proportionate to the harm it might do if I kept it. And again, the Catechism is very strong here. Very grave situations. So the window on that is very small. So, the vast majority of times, if I've been given confidential information under a seal of secrecy, I am bound to keep it. It is a professional secret, and in keeping it, I'm not violating against truth, and therefore not violating this commandment. The second aspect is, what about what I tell the priest in the confessional? Okay, is the priest bound to keep that? In the confessional, is he under a seal of secrecy, like professional secrets would be in the business and industrial world? Well, the Catechism is very specific about that, paragraph 2490. The secret of the sacrament of reconciliation is sacred and cannot be violated under any pretext. The sacramental seal, which is what it's called, it's not called a seal of secrecy, it's called a sacramental seal, but nevertheless it's a seal of secrecy. The sacramental seal is inviolable. Therefore, it is a crime for a confessor in any way to betray a penitent by word or any other manner for any reason. So professional secrets, the Catechism says there's a very, very, very small window in which you can divulge them, but it's only in the most grave situations, and you have to have proportionality. So the vast majority of the cases, you have to keep a professional secret, and that's not violating this commandment. But what about priests in the confessional? No window at all, okay? What the priest is told in confession, he cannot divulge for any reason, however grave, whatever the proportionality of it, because he's under a seal of secrecy, but even more than that, he's under a sacramental seal of secrecy. So if a priest were to divulge whatever sins a penitent tells him in the confessional, that would be a massive violation of the truth, and therefore a massive violation of this commandment. So those two other things that bear upon this commandment in their own ways, I want to make sure we mentioned as well: professional secrets and the confessional. So that's episode number 10. That's commandment number 8. And next episode, we'll talk about commandment number 9. And then in our final episode, we'll talk about commandment number 10. And just as a little teaser, for those of you that have been with us the entire journey, and it's a long one, we've got 10 commandments. We tacked an introduction on the front end. We've used 2 episodes to cover a couple of the commandments. So it's arguably, I think, Simon, our longest teaching course here at Fresh Catholic. But commandments number 9 and 10, we're almost there. And interestingly enough, even though they're both separate commandments and they're aimed at separate things, they do share a commonality. And that commonality is commandment 9 and 10 forbids covetousness. It forbids us engaging in the act of coveting. In one case, another's goods. In another case, another spouse. So commandments 9 and 10 talk about coveting and covetousness. And there's a number of different ways we can engage in that act and therefore violate either one or both of these last 2 commandments. But that's still to come. Until then, thank you for supporting Fresh Catholic. Thank you for continuing to hang with us in this very lengthy series. And until episode number 11 and commandment number 9, I'm Charles Merritt. Take care and God bless.